Good evening and welcome to my hobby table for a special edition of Engine Talk. And I say this is a special edition because, well, it's episode 42, I believe. And it's a special edition because I'm going to be focusing on OS, FSR engines and actually doing some comparisons of these engines. And seeing what the differences are, the similarities, etc. So, first one here is my 61 FSR. So this is an engine that I got from a swap meet here in Oshkosh probably 2.5, maybe 3 years ago. It was not new in box, it was used, and we'll get to that here eventually. The next one here is the one I just recently acquired here, which is a 60 FSR. So this is the earliest version, and we're gonna see there were two versions of the 60 FSR, and I don't know how many versions of the 61 FSR there were as far as updates. I don't know that maybe there were any updates. So first things first. So one of the things I like to do when I try to figure out the history of these engines is how old are the engines that I really have? I mean, sure, we're not counting production long life or longevity of the engine, but I specifically want to have a box with an engine in it, and I like to say that, well, everything in the box is still original and it came with this engine. And if that's the case, then I can use whatever documentation I've got there to try to figure out the actual age or date of release of the particular engine in question. So let's start with this 61 FSR, and you can see here this actually says with the 7M carburetor, and that's just a sticker that was placed on here. So I was of the impression that initially that this particular engine didn't come stock, the 61 didn't come stock with that carb, because I believe it came stock with a 7D carb. I believe there's a review article that I can reference here. But so that would mean this is a little bit, possibly a little bit later version. So let's just take this engine out and let me show you how I kind of go about figuring out the actual age of engines. So we see all these, what is this stuff? This is not original copies here. But the key thing is the marketing literature that comes with these engines, because having been in manufacturing for many, many years, I can tell you that when it comes to marketing literature, they always want to have the absolute latest and greatest marketing literature with things that hit the shelf, because that's how they're doing a lot of advertising. So I like to use the marketing literature that comes with and used to come with all engines, but sadly it doesn't anymore, as a means to try to figure out what the actual age of this particular engine and box are. So I'd go through here and I'll reference all these things against my OS Engines timeline that is on the wall over there. And that timeline spans 1936 to 2020, and I believe that's the last timeline that was created. So on this particular one, this is the style that came out, this open book style or a big brochure like this. I don't know exactly what year it came out, but I'll show you something that looks very different here very soon. But here I just so happen to get lucky and I'm looking through the engines, but then I see this one here that says new engine, which would imply that that is probably one of the later engines. And according to the OS Engines timeline, the FS120 was released in 1983. So, therefore, I am going to say that this engine in this box dates back to 1983. So with all that said, let me pull this thing out, and we'll set this 1983 engine here and move this other stuff down to the floor here to make room. So here is the 61 FSR, and we'll zoom in here and I'll get more tight shots here and explain some of the differences I see. Now this particular 60 FSR came with a very unusual, I don't know that I've ever seen a marketing brochure that was in this small booklet form like this. This is an incredible book because it has so many interesting things in here. In fact, I could probably do a whole video just on this book, but I'll save you that. So anyway, I was going through this book, and this one doesn't really include, it only includes the FS60 4-stroke. So it doesn't include all, it doesn't appear to include all of the engines because most of them are 2-strokes, and then of course you got the one 4-stroke, and I'm sure that there was other 4-strokes available. But this one here, Max 25 FSR, is the key engine that I'm seeing here because this engine was released in 1977. And as far as I can tell, looking at all these other things, that was the latest engine that I could find according to the OS Engines timeline. So I'm saying that this engine that I'm about to take out here dates to 1977, maybe 78. I'm not sure. But one of the things I am going to show you real quick, which I thought was super freaking interesting. Look at this. Look at this ad here for a vibration tachometer. I have never ever heard of such a thing. So obviously, I don't know how you would use this, but obviously these tines would vibrate based on RPM of the engine. And I have no idea if you put it before, in front of the prop, after, of the side of the prop. I have no idea. All I know is that that's a really interesting item that I have never heard of nor seen. It looks like one of those combs that you would use in like the late 70s and 80s if you had a big afro like I used to have. But anyway, so that was interesting. So let me take this engine out and let's start to do a more in-depth comparison of these two engines. So let me take this one out of the bag. And this one is one I can guarantee you, this is new in the box, never seen a single drop of fuel, bar none. I can guarantee it. Now I'm not going to bother taking the exhausts out because they're both exhausts are identical and they're not super relevant to this comparison. So now that I've got these engines here, let me zoom in real tight here so we can get up close and personal with the differences. Now, on the surface, you may think or see, wow, those two engines are identical. And according to that one review article that I'll post a link to, it was actually a review article on the 61 FSR. I think it might have been one of the original, or when the 61 FSR came out. It wasn't a super long article, but it did have a section in there that actually showed a 60 FSR, a 60 FSR, and then a 61 FSR side by side. A very small picture, but in the description under the illustration or the picture, it stated differences between them, and of course in that review it also stated the differences. But in all actuality, these are two very different engines, even though they look very similar. So let's start with some of the major differences, and hopefully you can see I don't have my calipers out, but I hope you can see that one of the major differences is that this original 60 FSR has a very small diameter crankshaft journal that comes out of the engine, and the threaded portion, I mean, this threaded portion looks like it's a quarter 28. I mean, it's really small. So we've got a huge difference in the crankshafts. Let's see if you can do it like this. Maybe you can see the difference a little bit better. I don't know. They're just vastly different. This is a 5/16 by 24, something like that. Crankshaft. It's a 5/16 crankshaft. So that's a major difference. Here's another difference. If you look at this area of the crankcase on each of these, again, I don't have my calipers out. I probably could have brought my calipers out, but I didn't want to get that technical. But if I hold these things up side by side like this, you can see that it looks like the front ball bearing is a different size too on the front, because this casting is appears to be smaller than this casting here. This looks like this is fitted for a larger bearing by virtue of the fact that the ID or the OD of the crankshaft there is larger than this one. So that's a major difference. So I think there was only like three things maybe that were the same between these two engines according to that review. And one of them was, I think, the wrist pin of the piston was the same. What else was the same? Maybe the sleeve was the same? I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at that. So there are only a couple of very minor things. Other than that, they're completely different engines. So here's another thing that's different. Look at the way this carb is mounted. It's got your older or your newer style draw nut type of thing mounting for this large carb. Whereas this one still retains the older style for a much smaller engine where they would use the two screws on either side to hold the carb in place. And of course, this is a very different carb too. I mean, this is a, let's see, a 7B, I believe, 7B carb, and this is a huge 7M carburetor. I mean, so just look at the difference. Look at the difference in size of these carbs. Is that open? Let's open that up. So there's a huge difference right there. So you got huge difference in carb design and carb size, carb mounting. What else can we find that's different? Well, I'm sure we can find something else that's different. And if we look at the rear cover, let me put this little tube back on here to protect my ratcheting mechanism. If we look at the rear cover, look at the rear cover. What's the difference you see there? It's got a tap here, or a port, so that you could tap that and put a inlet on there if you're going to be using a pump for the engine. So this whole rear cover is different. This one's got a part number in it. This one does not. I'm trying to think if there's some other things that I thought were different. You know, these are minor things now. I'm getting more minor. Like this one here says 60 SR on it. This one here just says 61. I believe this side pretty much looks the same. It looks like they have the same number of cooling fins. And the heads are both bronze or brass bushed at the glow plug. So the other difference between these two engines, and of course it's not really because of anything other than it's just a design thing, is this is the ABN version. I believe they also made this in a ringed version. That's just not what this one is. And of course this is a ringed engine. But those are the key differences between these 260 FSRs. Now, consequently, I also have this engine here, which is a 61 FSR-H. It's the helicopter engine that was just given to me. Now, I'm going to say I don't have a documentation package or box or anything that goes with this. I'm just going by according to the OS Engines timeline. And that says that this was a 1979 engine. Now, was the 1979 engine, did it have the 7H carb? I don't know. I don't know anything about timelines for carburetors. I know OS had a ton of them, and it seemed like they were different all the time. But so these two carbs could be interchangeable on this engine. The 7M and the 7H, obviously. They've got very much the same similarities. I don't think, obviously, a 7M carb will not fit on this engine at all. It's just the throat is there. The OD is smaller over here. So here's the 79 engine. So we've got 83, 79, and I'm going to say 77, 78 right here. And these are the three 60 size FSR engines that I currently have possession of, and quite honestly I think they're just fantastic examples of OS engineering. I love OS engines from the 70s and 80s, and you know, even going into the 90s, but these are just fantastic engines to have, I think, and they're just super cool. So I just wanted to give provide some information, show these nice comparisons. In the future, I got some other engines, not necessarily OS, but different brands of engines that were theoretically the same or clones of OS engines, and maybe to include an OS engine like a Magnum Pro and a Royal 45 and some other things like that. I'll be doing some more of these comparison videos to kind of show engines of the same displacement that are what would be called clones of OS, because everybody was cloning or copying OS engineering and design from, who knows for how long they've been doing it. So it's interesting to kind of say, oh, well, those two engines look the same. And then you start looking a little more closely and you're like, wait a minute here. No, they're not exactly the same. Even though they may have been made in the same manufacturing facility, that doesn't necessarily mean that all the castings and metallurgy and all that stuff is exactly the same, because I worked in contract manufacturing for many years, and we would have companies, and what a contract manufacturer is just a manufacturing facility that has contracts with all different kinds of companies. Like we would make laptop computers and we would make quantum tape drives and things like that. So I mean, in one facility. So that's what Sanye was, I believe, and maybe some other companies. They were just contract manufacturers that had the manufacturing capability to make a whole bunch of different engines, but the engines could be rebranded and use different castings and stuff like that. They might use the same production equipment, CNC machines and stuff, but some of the castings would be different. So they could have all originated or come from the same factory, but yet still be very different in look, appearance, and operation. So anyway, that concludes my comparison video for today. I hope you learned something. I know I learned something every time I look at my OS Engines timeline, and I can't even tell you how many times I've sat and stared at that thing looking at it.